What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. You guys loved the last one of these I made so much, I knew I had to make you another one. So this is the top combat footage and stories of valor from 2024 part 2. This video is absolutely insane and there is a ton of combat footage throughout it, so it is definitely going to get suppressed hard by YouTube. If you guys could do me a favor and hit that like button, it really helps fight against YouTube's just ridiculous policies, and I really appreciate the support. And definitely check out the Patreon link down in the description below as well. We just hit 23,000 total members over there, which is insane. I'm posting tons of uncensored combat footage you won't find anywhere else, as well as exclusive uncensored versions of these longer YouTube videos over on Patreon. So definitely go check it out. You're missing out if you haven't looked into it already. With all that being said, thank you guys so much for all the support. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let's jump into it. On July 22nd, 2003, 8 Delta Force operators from Task Force 121 slapped a hefty breaching charge on the front door of one of Iraq's largest mansions. The mansion was the home of two of America's most wanted men, with a combined $30 million bounty on their heads. Due to them having the element of surprise, Delta expected minimal resistance from the enemy. In fact, the 8-man team fully intended on capturing the two HVTs alive, but unfortunately, that isn't how it went down at all. As the operators entered the front door, they received heavy fire from the second floor of the mansion, where the enemy had barricaded themselves in a well-fortified position with no intentions of surrender. In 2003, a military coalition led by the United States invaded Iraq and overthrew the country's Ba'athist government under Saddam Hussein. Following the defeat of the Iraqi army, Saddam and his sons Uday and Usay went into hiding and became wanted fugitives by the occupying coalition forces. Uday had been the founder and commander of the Fedayeen Saddam, a loyalist paramilitary organization that served as Saddam Hussein's personal guard, while Usay had been a high-ranking member of the Iraqi Republican Guard. Usay and Uday Hussein were the ace of hearts and ace of clubs in the coalition's most wanted Iraqi playing cards. Saddam himself was, of course, the ace of spades, but a combined $30 million reward for the brothers' capture was posted by the coalition authorities. Nawaf al-Zaydan, a businessman and close friend of Saddam's family, had been sheltering Uday and Usay along with their bodyguards in his mansion in northeastern Mosul for around 3 weeks. But unfortunately for the brothers, the $30 million reward was just a little too tempting for al-Zaydan. And on the night of July 21st, 2003, al-Zaydan left the villa and went to a nearby U.S. Coalition 101st Airborne Base to turn in the two sons for the $30 million reward. The American military intelligence sergeant who interviewed al-Zaydan reported him being incredibly nervous to betray the brothers, but confident in his decision to get the reward. During his interview with the intelligence sergeant, al-Zaydan passed a lie detector test and gave extremely accurate descriptions of the brothers along with their exact location. And with that information in hand, a decision was made to send a detachment from Delta Force to apprehend the brothers. And so that next morning at about 10 a.m. on Tuesday, July 22nd, 8 Delta Force operators from Task Force 121, accompanied by 40 infantrymen from the 101st Airborne Division, surrounded the safe house. The operators then used a bullhorn to order the house's occupants to come out and surrender, but there was no response. After waiting for about 10 minutes, the 8 Delta Force operators stacked up on the front door and knocked on the door. When there was no answer, the soldiers quickly breached the front door and entered the house. But as they entered the first room, the team came under heavy gunfire from the house's defenders, who were armed with AK-47s and had barricaded themselves on the building's second floor. In the ensuing gun battle, 3 Delta operators were wounded inside the house, and the team quickly realized there was no way they'd be able to push to the second floor and take out the enemy with just 8 men. So the call came out to fall back and exit the house. But as the entry team attempted to withdraw, the occupants moved to the windows and began shooting out of the windows down at the operators, wounding a fourth Delta operator. The 4 wounded operators were evacuated by helicopter as the team retreated from the building and called for backup. After the Delta guys retreated from the house, soldiers from the 101st Airborne Division surrounded the safe house and opened fire with Mark 19 grenade launchers, AT-4 rockets, and Humvee-mounted 50 caliber Browning machine guns. An intense gun battle ensued, and by 11:22 a.m., over an hour into the firefight, more than 200 reinforcement soldiers arrived to assist the task force. And when I say that these guys were in a heavily fortified position on the second floor of this building, I mean it. After an hour of being hammered by grenade launchers, AT-4 rockets, and 50 caliber machine guns, not only were these dudes still alive in that mansion, but they were still actively returning fire. And at 11:45 a.m., several OH-58D Army helicopters arrived and began firing at the safe house, destroying a large portion of the building with machine gun rounds and rockets. But nevertheless, the task force continued to receive heavy gunfire from the house's occupants. The photo you guys are seeing on screen right now is the real photo of what the safe house looked like after being hammered by the helicopters. How in the world are these dudes still alive? And not only are they still alive, they seem mostly unfazed. They're still returning heavy gunfire as well as lobbing frag grenades from the rooftop. Half of the building has completely collapsed and the rest of the building is barely standing. They have weathered grenade launcher rounds, AT-4 rockets, 50 caliber machine guns, and several Army helicopters hitting them with rockets and machine gun rounds. They've weathered all of this in a random mansion. The task force heavily considered using an Apache helicopter to destroy the safe house, but it was ruled out due to concerns of potential civilian casualties. But at 1 p.m., 3 hours into the operation, 10 TOW missiles were fired at the house from Humvee-mounted launchers. The resulting explosion reduced much of the safe house to rubble. At 1:21 p.m., several American soldiers entered the ruined house to search for survivors. They found Uday and Usay dead. As the team advanced up the stairs to the building's second floor, they found Usay's son somehow still alive and taking cover in a bedroom. He opened fire on the soldiers with an AK-47, but was eliminated instantly by returning fire. And with that, the 3.5-hour-long gunfight had finally come to an end. Following the raid, the bodies of all 4 occupants were removed from the house and flown to Baghdad for identification tests. Usay and Uday were identified and confirmed through DNA testing and dental records. Both men had significantly changed their appearance to avoid detection. Uday had completely shaved his head, and Usay had trimmed his signature beard. And with the 2 brothers eliminated, the $30 million reward would be paid to the informant who tipped off coalition authorities. The Shok Valley in Afghanistan's Nuristan province is so impenetrable that during their nearly 10-year occupation of the country, the Soviets never entered it once. And for the first 7 years of Operation Enduring Freedom, no coalition troops did either. Until the morning of April 6, 2008, when a 12-man team of U.S. Special Forces Green Berets jumped from a helicopter into the Shok Valley, becoming the first members of a foreign military to step foot on the treacherous home turf of Hezbi Islami Golbadin, otherwise known as HIG, the notorious military group that had controlled the valley for decades. The firefight that erupted in Shok Valley that day is one of the most harrowing battles ever waged by American operators during the war in Afghanistan. By the time the dust settled, 4 of the 12 Special Forces soldiers were critically wounded and 10 had earned silver stars for their actions that left more than 150 insurgents dead in their wake. Thank Thank you guys so much for checking out this video. I hope you enjoy it. If you guys could do me a quick favor and hit that like button, it helps me out a tremendous amount. I know everyone gets super sick of YouTubers begging for likes and all that, and I totally get it. I wouldn't do it if it wasn't necessary, guys, but I want to make sure as many people as possible get to hear these incredible stories. The entire point of this channel is to highlight the unbelievably heroic things and sacrifices that our brave men and women in uniform do for this country. And if no one is able to hear about these stories because YouTube is constantly shadow banning us and deleting videos and age restricting videos, then all of the effort I'm putting into making this content is for nothing. So do me a favor and help me out. Help me share these stories. Just hit that like button. I don't need you to do anything else. I couldn't care less if you subscribe. I couldn't care less about anything else. Just hit that like button to help more people get to see this video and push it higher up in the algorithm. But with that being said, guys, I'm not going to waste any more of your time. Thank you so much for watching the video. Let's continue on with it. Their mission was to capture or kill several high-ranking members of HIG, including the group's commander, but the militants were prepared for a big fight. In fact, it was later concluded that HIG had been stockpiling weapons and ammunition for a moment just like this since the Soviet-Afghan War. The Green Berets usually preferred to operate at night, but this particular mission began at daybreak. Unable to touch down on the mountain's jagged surface, the helicopter hovered about 10 feet above the ground while one by one the Green Berets leapt into an icy stream, joined by a small group of Afghan commandos. As the Americans took in their surroundings, they realized that the remote mountainside was alive with insurgent activity. And while the original plan was to fight their way down the mountain instead of up it, they also realized that the helicopter had dropped them off about 1,000 feet below a village fortified with a series of fighting positions, including mud compounds with portholes for snipers. The buildings in the village are built one on top of the other, on top of a slope thousands of feet in the air. So the Green Berets started their climb. The enemy insurgents, however, waited until the lead element was within a couple hundred meters of the compound before they initiated contact. The commandos were now completely surrounded. Bullets began whipping in from virtually every direction and with deadly accuracy. One immediately struck and killed the interpreter standing next to Walton. Another struck Staff Sergeant Dylan Bear, a communications sergeant, in the hip. Meanwhile, the lead assault force, which included Staff Sergeant David Sanders and about 10 other commandos, reached the village, where they too came under heavy fire. As reports of casualties came over the radio, Walton decided to call in close air support. He radioed to Sanders to ask him if he was too close, but Sanders simply responded, "Bring it anyway." Bombs then started exploding everywhere. Once the bombing run started to come to an end, Walton radioed Sanders again to ask if he was still alive, but all he could hear him saying was, "Hit them again." Over the course of the firefight, the Green Berets called in a total of 70 danger-close airstrikes. Several commandos were wounded by the shrapnels and debris that showered the mountainside with each explosion. But the insurgents were dug in so deeply that the airstrikes did little to stop the attack. Rocket-propelled grenades, small arms, and machine gun fire continued to rain down on the operators and their Afghan counterparts. The pilots circling above reported observing 200 armed insurgents closing in on their position. The commandos fought back with a barrage of rifle fire, rockets, and grenades, but continued to sustain casualties. One soldier's leg was nearly removed by a round that struck him just below the right knee. The soldier quickly grabbed his boot and put it up against his thigh, and then took his bootlaces and tied his foot to his thigh so it wouldn't flop around. Another round glazed the helmet of the team's medic, and Master Sergeant Scott Ford, the team's sergeant, was shot twice, once through the shoulder and once in the chest. The round thankfully didn't penetrate his body armor though. With nowhere else for them to go, a triage area was quickly set up on the side of a cliff. Staff Sergeant Seth Howard was the team's weapons sergeant and a trained sniper. When the firefight began, he was further down the mountainside, and he and his element had to fight their way up. As Ford, who was bleeding profusely, began evacuating the most critically wounded soldiers, Howard took up position to cover their movement. By that point, the insurgents were so close the Americans could hear their voices, and the wounded had to be leapfrogged down the mountainside between airstrikes. Meanwhile, Howard stayed behind, picking off insurgents. Howard had less than a magazine of ammunition left when he joined his team en route to the stream, where the operation had begun 7 hours earlier. Many of the commandos had to jump off a 20-foot cliff on their way down. A medevac helicopter arrived but was only able to hover long enough to drop off a flight medic before being shot off the landing zone. On the second evacuation attempt, the bird landed in the middle of the stream, forcing the commandos to make a mad dash with the casualties through the icy water. With all the commandos now safely back on the helicopter, they made their way back to base. Miraculously, none of the Green Berets were killed during the mission. Later on in an interview, Walton said, "Our goal is to never get into a fight. We'd rather sit down and drink some chai. We were hoping this mission would be the same, but we got into a big fight, and some of us got hit while trying to save each other. That's what we do." Walton, along with 9 other Green Berets, were awarded the Silver Star, the military's 3rd highest award for valor. And as if all of that wasn't already crazy enough, the team's medic Ronald Schurer and Weapons Sergeant Matthew Williams were both awarded the Medal of Honor for their actions during the battle. 2 different Medal of Honors came out of this one operation, which is insane. And like I said earlier on in the video, by the end of the 7+ hour long battle, the 12 Green Berets had eliminated more than 150 enemy insurgents without losing 1 American. October 2011, 2 Western aid workers were taken hostage by pirates in Somalia. They had been engaged in a demining project for the Danish Refugee Council, a non-governmental organization. 32-year-old American Jessica Buchanan and 61-year-old Paul Thisted had been snatched from their vehicle by armed pirates while they were traveling in northern Somalia. The pair were driven to a series of remote locations in the desert. Then the pirates contacted the NGO to demand a ransom. The NGO quickly alerted the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi, and soon after that, the FBI became involved and President Obama was briefed. Negotiations between the kidnappers and authorities dragged on for several months. While this was going on, the FBI team assigned to the case identified the specific pirate clan involved and eventually was able to pinpoint the location where the hostages were being held. How the camp was located remains classified, although it is likely that signal intercepts and the use of unmanned drones played a huge role. What really complicated things is Buchanan suffered from a thyroid condition that required regular medication that she was not getting. On top of that, poor sanitary conditions in the pirate camp resulted in her contracting a kidney infection that required antibiotics. As time progressed, her medical condition continued to deteriorate, and during a phone call with the negotiators, she expressed fears that her condition would soon become fatal. As a result, it was judged that her medical predicament presented an imminent threat to life, a diagnosis that now put a military intervention into play. On the 23rd of January 2012, President Obama had a meeting with his advisory team during which he greenlit a JSOC rescue operation. The rescue force would include members of Naval Special Warfare Development Group, U.S. Air Force Special Operations Command, the Army's 160th Special Operation Aviation Regiment, and elements of the FBI's hostage rescue team. On the night night of the 24th at the U.S. operations base in Djibouti, around 24 operators from DevGru's Blue Squadron loaded onto an MC-130 cargo plane. The aircraft flew to a point high above the Somalia desert. It was an ideal night for such an operation, with a new moon providing a cloak of pitch black darkness. The SEALs performed a high-altitude, high-opening parachute jump, gliding silently down to Earth with the help of their oxygen apparatuses and night vision. The SEALs landed far enough away from the target building to ensure that they would not alert the pirates of their presence. With all boots now on the ground, the operators formed up and set out on a march into the open desert, heading to the pirates and the hostages. When the DevGru team reached the camp, they were pleased to find a mostly still and quiet scene. Due to a distaste for dogs, the pirates had not stationed watchdogs around the camp, which made their job significantly easier. And even better, the human sentries tasked with protecting the encampment lacked discipline and were either asleep or stoned on a locally popular narcotic, leaving the place effectively unguarded. The SEALs silently crept into their final assault positions when something suddenly spooked one of the half-conscious pirates, who leapt to his feet and cocked his AK-47. A moment later, the DevGru team unleashed hell on the pirates, firing their HK-416s and HK-MP7s with well-practiced precision. And soon, all 9 pirates lay dead, and no SEALs had been harmed during the very brief firefight. With all pirates now taken care of, the hostages were safe and in stable condition. From the point of view of the hostages, they heard bursts of gunfire accompanied by the cries of pirates as they were hit. Then heavily armed bearded men with green glowing eyes walked in the room and proclaimed, "We're with the American military, we're here to take you home." The DevGru team and the 2 hostages then exfilled on foot to a nearby pre-arranged extraction point, where they were picked up by a number of helicopters flown by the 160th SOAR. Buchanan and Fisted were then flown to the base in Djibouti, where they were given medical treatment. The hostages had been held captive for 93 days, but they were finally going home. On the helicopter flight out of Somalia, a member of the FBI HRT team handed Buchanan a folded Stars and Stripes flag. She describes this moment in her book, saying she had never been more proud to be an American. And Paul Fisted later commented that he had the great fortune to have been taken hostage alongside an American.